smog. The sun would have felt warm if the wind had stopped blowing. No one was up there at all. Nita took a few steps off the paved walkway that led to the little glass building and scuffed at the gravel suspiciously. "This wind is pretty stiff," she said. "Maybe a good gust of it caught some of this gravel and threw it at the door." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. "Maybe," Kit said. His voice made it plain that he didn't believe it either. "Come on, let's find the gate." "That side," Nita said, pointing south, where the building was wider. They headed toward the railing together, crunching across the gravel. Fred perched on Nita's shoulder. She looked at him with affection. "Worried?" "No, but you are." "A little. That sound shook me up." She paused again, wondering if she heard something behind her. She turned. Nothing. The roof was bare. But still. Nita turned back and hurried to catch up with Kit, who was looking back at her. "Something?" "I don't know. I doubt it. You know how you see things out of the corner of your eye? Movements that aren't there? I thought maybe the door moved a little." "I don't know about you," Kit said, "but I'm not going to turn my back on anything while I'm up here. Fred, keep your eyes open." Kit paused by the railing, examining the ledge below it, maybe 6 feet wide, and then looked up again. "On second thought, do you have eyes?" "I don't know," Fred said, confused but courteous as always. "Do you have calicare?" "Good question," Nita said, touched nervously. "Kit, let's do this and get out of here." He nodded, unslung his pack, and laid the aspirin, pinecone, and fork on the gravel by the railing. Nita got out the Rowan wand and dropped it with the other materials, while Kit went through his book again, stopping at another marked spot. "Okay," he said after a moment. "This is an imaging and patency spell for a Temporospatial Claudication, ADAS class. Purpose, retrieval of an accidentally internalized object. Manner, energy quotient." Kit read a long string of syllables, a description in the speech of Nita's pen, followed by another symbol group that meant Fred, and described the properties of the little personal world gate that kept his great mass at a great distance. Nita held her breath, waiting for another onslaught of uncanny feelings, but none ensued. When Kit stopped reading and the spell turned her loose, it was almost a surprise to see, hanging there in the air, the thing they had been looking for. Puckered, roughly oblong, vaguely radiant, an 8-foot scar on the sky. The world gate, about 100 feet out from the edge where they stood and maybe 30 feet below the heliport level. "Well," Kit said then, sounding very pleased with himself, "there we are. And it looks all right. Not much different from the description in the book. Now all we have to do is get to it." Nita picked up the Rowan wand, which for the second part of the spell would serve as a key to get the pen through the world gate and out of Fred. She tucked the wand into her belt, leaned on the railing, and looked out at the air. According to the wizard's manual, air, like the other elements, had a memory, and could be convinced in the speech to revert to something it had been before. It was this memory of being locked in stone as oxides or nitrates, or frozen solid in the deeps of space, that made the air harden briefly for the shielding spell. Nita started that spell in its simplest form, and then went on into a more formal one, as much as a reminiscing as a convincing. She talked to the air about the old days when starlight wouldn't twinkle because there was nothing to make it do so, and when every shadow was sharp as a razor, and distances didn't look distant because there was no air to soften them. The immobility came down around her as the spell began to say itself along with Nita, matching her cadence. She kept her eyes closed, not looking, for fear something that should be happening might not be. Slowly, with her words, she began to shape the hardening air into an oblong, pushing it out through the other, thinner air she wasn't including in the spell. "It's working better than usual. Faster," she thought. "Maybe it's all the smog here. This air's half solid already." She kept talking. Kit whispered something, but she couldn't make out what and didn't want to try. "I know it's a strain, being solid these days," she whispered in the speech, "but just for a little while. Just to make a walkway out to that puckered place in the sky. Then you can relax. Nothing too thick, just strong enough to walk on. Nita." "Nita!" The sound of her name in the speech caught her attention. She opened her eyes. Arrow straight, sloping down from the lower curb of the railing between her and Kit, the air had gone hard. There was dirt and smog trapped in it, making the sudden walkway more translucent than transparent, but there was no mistaking it for anything but air. It had a more delicate, fragile look than any glass ever could, no matter how thin. The walkway ran smooth and even all the way out to the world gate, widening beneath it into room enough for 2 to stand. "Wow," Nita said, sagging against the railing and rubbing at her eyes as she let the spell go. She was tired. The spelling was a strain, and that feeling of nervousness left over from the loud noise outside the stairwell came back. She glanced over her shoulder again, wondering just what she was looking for. Kit peered over the railing at the walkway. "This better be some pen," he said, and turned his back to the world gate, watching the roof. "Go ahead." Nita made sure her backpack was slung properly, checked the Rowan wand again, and slowly swung over the guardrail, balancing on the stone in which it was rooted. She was shaking and her hands were wet. "If I don't just do this," she thought, "I never will. Just one step down, Callahan, and then a nice solid walkway straight across. Really. Believe. Ouch!" The air was so transparent that she misjudged the distance down to it. Her foot hit before she thought it would, and the jolt went right up her spine. Still holding the railing, Nita lifted that foot a bit, then stomped down hard on the walkway. It was no different than stomping on a sidewalk. She let her weight down on that foot, brought the second down, and stomped with that, too. It was solid. "Like rock, Kit," she said, looking up at him, still holding the rail. "Come on." "Sure," Kit said, skeptical. "Let go of the rail first." Nita made a face at Kit and let go. She held both arms out at first, as she might have on a balance beam in gym, then waved them experimentally. "See? It works! Fred?" Fred bobbed down beside her, looking with interest at the hardened air of the walkway. "And it will stay this way? Until I turn it loose. Well?" She took a step backward, farther onto the walkway, and looked up challengingly. "How about it?" Kit said nothing, just slung his own backpack over his shoulders and swung over the railing as Nita had done, coming down cautiously on the hardened air. He held onto the rail for a moment while conducting his own tests of the air's solidity. "Come on," Nita said. "The wind's not too bad." "Lead the way." Nita turned around, still holding her arms a little away from her to be sure of her balance, and started for the world gate as quickly as she dared, with Fred pacing her cheerfully to the left. 8 or 10 steps more, and it was becoming almost easy. She even glanced down toward the walkway, and there she stopped, very suddenly, her stomach turning right over at the sight of the dirty, graveled roof of Grand Central, a long fall below. "Don't look down," a memory said to her in Machu Picchu's scratchy voice. She swallowed, shaking all over, wishing she had remembered the advice earlier. "Nita, what's the—" Something went whack into the walkway. Nita jumped, lost her balance, and staggered back into Kit. For a few awful seconds they teetered back and forth in wind that gusted suddenly, pushing them toward the edge together. And then Kit sat down hard on the walkway, and Nita half fell on top of him, and they held very still for a few gasps. "What?" "I think it was a pigeon," Nita said, not caring whether Kit heard the tremulousness of her voice. "You okay?" "Sure," Kit said, just as shakily. "I try to have a heart attack every day, whether I need one or not. Get off my knee, huh?" They picked each other up and headed for the gate again. "Even you have trouble with gravity," Fred said wonderingly as he paced them. "I'm glad I left my mass elsewhere." "So are we," Nita said. She hurried the last 20 steps or so to the widened place at the end of the walkway, with Kit following close. She knelt down in a hurry to make sure the wind wouldn't push her over again and looked up at the world gate. Seen this close, it was about 4 feet by 8, the shape of a tear in a piece of cloth. It shone with a palely glowing, shifting, soap bubble iridescence. Finally my pen, she thought. But somehow the thought didn't make Nita as happy as it should have. The uneasy feeling that had started in the stairwell was still growing. She glanced over her shoulder at Kit. He was kneeling too, with his back to her, watching the walkway and the rooftop intently. Beside her, Fred hung quietly, waiting. "Now what?" he asked. Nita sighed, pulled the Rowan rod out of her belt, and inserted one end of it delicately into the shimmering veil that was the surface of the world gate. Though the city skyline could be seen very clearly through the shimmer, the inch or so of the wand that went through it appeared to vanish. "Just perch yourself on the free end here," Nita said, holding the wand by its middle. "Make contact with it the same way you did with those keys, okay?" Simple enough. Fred floated to the end of the rod and lit there, a bright, still spark. "All right, I'm ready." Nita nodded. "This is a retrieval," she said in a speech. "Involvement confined to a pen with the following characteristics. Mositizian 6.3... Nita! The note of pure terror in Kit's mind voice caused Nita to do the unforgivable. Break off in the middle of a spell and look over her shoulder. Shapes were pouring out of the little glass shelter building, which had been empty, and was still somehow empty even as Nita looked. She got a first impression of grizzled coats, bright tongues that lolled and slavered, fangs that gleamed in the sunlight, and she thought, "Wolves!" But their eyes changed her mind, as 10 or 12 of the creatures loped across the roof toward the transparent walkway, giving tongue in an awful mindless cacophony of snarls and barks and shuddering howls. Their eyes, people's eyes, blue, brown, green, but with almost all the intelligence gone out of them, nothing left but a hot, deadly cunning and an awful desire for the taste of blood. From her reading in the wizard's manual, she knew what they were. Pratons. Wolves would have been preferable. Wolves were sociable creatures. These had been people once. People so used to hating that at the end of their life they'd found a way to keep doing it, by hunting the souls of others through their nightmares. And once a Praton caught you, Nita started to hitch backward in total panic and then froze, realizing that there was nowhere to go. She and Kit were trapped. Another second and the Pratons would be on the bridge and at their throats for eternity. Kit whipped his head around toward Nita and the world gate. "Jump through and break the spell," he yelled. "But," and she grabbed his arm, pushed the Rowan wand through her belt and yelled, "Come on, Fred!" The first 3 Pratons leapt the guardrail and landed on the bridge, running. Nita threw herself and Kit at the world gate, being careful of the edges, as she knew she must, while screaming in absolute terror the word that would dissolve the walkway proper. For a fraction of a second she caught the sound of screams other than her own, howls of creatures unseen but falling. Then the shimmer broke against her face like water, shutting out sound and light and finally thought. Blinded, deafened and alone, she fell forever. I think Chaz was scared by this chapter.